The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Genoa, Nevada's general store, and every soul on that dusty street turned to stare as Willa Brennan stepped down onto the wooden planks, her worn traveling dress doing nothing to hide the obvious swell of her belly beneath the fabric. It was July 1872, and the summer heat bore down on the small settlement nestled at the base of the Sierra Nevada mountains, but the air seemed to freeze solid the moment folks realized what they were looking at. Willa kept her chin high even as she felt their eyes burning into her like brands. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and 6 months along with a child whose father had put a bullet in his own head rather than face what he had done. That was the story anyway, the one that had followed her all the way from Sacramento after Richard Morrison's wife had discovered his indiscretion and made certain the entire city knew exactly who had tempted her husband astray. Never mind that Richard had been the one doing the tempting, the lying, the promising. Never mind that Willa had believed every word about his marriage being over, about him filing for divorce, about them starting fresh together. The truth had come out like poison, and Sacramento had made its judgment swift and absolute. So here she stood in Genoa, Nevada, population maybe 300 on a good day, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, a smaller town meant kinder people. She was wrong. The woman behind the counter in the general store took one look at Willa and her traveling bag and said, "We don't have any rooms for rent here." "I have money," Willa said quietly, pulling a small purse from her bag. "I can pay whatever the rate is." "There ain't no rate for women like you." The shopkeeper's wife had a face like sun-dried leather and eyes just as hard. "You best get back on that stage when it heads out tomorrow morning." "Please," Willa said, hating the way her voice cracked. "I just need somewhere to stay until I can find work, get on my feet." "Work?" The woman laughed, sharp and ugly. "What kind of work you think you are going to find here? We have got decent folk in this town, families with children. We do not need your kind bringing shame to our streets." Willa felt something hot and terrible rising in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had cried all her tears already. Back in Sacramento, when the women she thought were her friends had crossed the street to avoid her, when her landlady had thrown her belongings into the mud, when the church she had attended since childhood had asked her not to return. She turned and walked out of that store with her back straight and her head up, even though she could hear the whispers starting already, spreading like wildfire through the small town. By the time she reached the boarding house at the end of the street, the door was already shut in her face before she could even knock. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Willa stood in the middle of the street with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The stage would not leave until morning, which meant a night on the street or perhaps in the stable, if the owner would even allow that. She was considering her options when she heard men's voices raised in anger coming from the saloon. Moments later, 3 men emerged, one of them being shoved roughly by the other 2. "And do not come back, Fenn. We do not want your kind here either." The man they were pushing stumbled but caught himself, turning to face them with a look that could have melted iron. Willa found herself staring despite her own troubles. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of the doorway. His hair hung past his shoulders in dark brown waves, and several days' worth of beard covered his strong jaw. His arms were bare beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves, revealing muscles that spoke of hard labor and harder living. Your whiskey was watered down anyway. "Tom," the big man said, his voice a deep rumble that carried across the street, "I will take my business elsewhere. There ain't no elsewhere that will have you. Mountain trash coming down here thinking you belong with civilized people. Go back to your hole up there and stay there." The big man's hands clenched into fists the size of ham hocks, and for a moment Willa thought there would be violence. But then he seemed to shake it off, turning away from the saloon with a disgusted sound. His eyes swept the street and landed on Willa, taking in her situation in one quick assessing glance. He walked toward her with long strides, and Willa found herself frozen in place, uncertain whether to be frightened or hopeful or some strange combination of both. "You are the woman who came in on the stage," he said when he reached her. It was not a question. "Yes," Willa replied, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. They were dark green, she noticed, like the pine forests that covered the mountains rising up behind the town. "And they will not let you stay." Again, not a question, but Willa answered anyway. "No, they will not." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked down at her belly, then back up to her face. You got anyone coming for you? Husband, family? No one, Willa said, and she was proud that her voice did not shake. The big man nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He bent down, picked up her traveling bag like it weighed nothing at all, and said, "Come on, then." "Where?" Willa asked, not moving. "My mountain. I have got a cabin up there, about 2 hours' ride. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next." Willa stared at him. "I do not even know your name, Fenn Forrester. And you are?" "Willa Brennan." She hesitated, every warning she had ever received about strange men in dangerous situations running through her mind. But what choice did she have? The town had made it clear she was not welcome, and she would be damned if she would sleep in a stable like an animal. "Miss Brennan," Fenn said, and there was something almost formal in the way he said it, "I am offering you shelter and safety, nothing more. I live alone up there, have for 5 years now since I came out here from Missouri. I hunt, I trap, I trade my furs for supplies a few times a year. I do not bother anyone, and most days I prefer it when folks do not bother me. But I will not stand here and watch them run you out of town like a stray dog. So you can come with me, or you can take your chances here. Your choice." Willa looked back at the town, at the faces peering out from windows and doorways, at the closed doors and hostile eyes. Then she looked at Fenn Forrester, at his scarred hands and steady gaze, and the way he held her bag like it was nothing. "I will come with you," she said. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "Good. My horse is at the livery. Can you ride?" "Yes." "Then let us go before someone decides to cause more trouble." The livery owner was reluctant to let Fenn take his horse out, claiming he owed money for the boarding, but Fenn pulled out a few coins and dropped them on the counter with enough force to make them ring. "That is double what I owe you, Charlie. Now get out of my way." The horse was a big roan gelding that matched its owner in size and temperament, standing calm while Fenn secured Willa's bag to the saddle. He swung up onto the horse's back with easy grace despite his size, then reached down to Willa. "Give me your hand." Willa did, and found herself lifted up behind him as if she weighed nothing. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance, and she could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Hold on tight," Fenn said, and then they were moving, trotting out of town while the good people of Genoa watched them go. Willa looked back once and saw a group of women standing together near the general store, their faces pinched with disapproval and something that looked almost like satisfaction. Let them think what they wanted, she thought. She was done caring about the opinions of people who had already judged her without knowing her story. As they left the town behind and headed up into the foothills, Willa felt some of the tension that had been knotted in her shoulders for months begin to ease. The air was cooler here, scented with pine and sage, and the sound of the horses' hooves on the rocky trail was almost soothing. Fenn did not speak as they climbed higher, following a trail that seemed to exist more in his memory than in any actual markings on the ground. The sun sank lower, turning the sky into a masterpiece of purple and pink and gold, and Willa found herself leaning against the solid warmth of his back. Exhaustion finally catching up with her, she must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Fenn was saying, "We are here." Willa blinked and looked around. They were in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, and there in the center stood a cabin that looked like it had been built with care and skill. It was not large, but it was solid, with a stone chimney and a covered porch and windows that caught the last rays of daylight. Fenn dismounted and helped Willa down, his hands steady on her waist. She stumbled a bit when her feet hit the ground, her legs stiff from the ride, but he held her steady until she found her balance. "Let me get the horse settled, then I will show you inside," he said, leading the roan toward a small lean-to stable attached to the side of the cabin. Willa stood in the clearing and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The view was breathtaking, looking out over the valley below where she could just make out the lights of Genoa starting to flicker on as dusk settled in. Up here, though, it was peaceful in a way she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. No sounds of city traffic, no shouting neighbors, no constant press of people and noise and judgment. Just the whisper of wind through the pines and the call of an evening bird somewhere in the distance. Fenn returned a few minutes later with her bag in one hand. "Come on, I will get a fire started." The inside of the cabin was simple but well maintained. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a bed in one corner covered with furs and blankets. A door led to what Willa assumed was a storage room or perhaps a workshop. Fenn saw her looking at the bed and said, "You will take that. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Willa protested. "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. He was already kneeling by the fireplace, building up a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, pushing back the evening chill. Willa stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with herself. Fenn solved that problem by pulling out one of the chairs at the table and saying, "Sit down before you fall down. You look dead on your feet." She was too tired to argue, so she sat. Fenn moved around the cabin with quiet confidence, pulling down supplies, filling a pot with water from a barrel near the door, hanging it over the fire to heat. He sliced bread and cheese, set them on the table in front of her, then poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "Eat," he said. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Willa had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think, before I got on the stage." Fenn muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. "Eat all of that. I will make something more substantial in a bit." The bread was fresh enough and the cheese was sharp and good, and Willa found herself eating with more appetite than she had expected. Fenn busied himself at the fireplace, adding things to the pot of water that soon filled the cabin with savory smells. "Why are you doing this?" Willa asked after a while. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be everything they say I am." Fenn glanced at her over his shoulder. "And what is it they say you are? A fallen woman, a homewrecker, a Jezebel who seduced a married man and drove him to suicide." "Did you?" "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "I thought he was getting divorced. He told me his marriage was over. I believed him because I was a fool." "Sounds like he was the fool," Fenn said, turning back to his cooking. "And a coward besides if he killed himself rather than face what he had done." Willa felt something tight in her chest, loosen just a fraction. That is not what most people think. Most people are idiots who would rather blame a woman than hold a man accountable for his actions. Fenn ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, setting one in front of Willa and taking the other for himself. "Eat up. You are feeding 2 now." The stew was good, rich with meat and vegetables, and Willa ate until her bowl was empty. Fenn refilled it without asking, and she managed to eat half of that before her stomach finally admitted defeat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there." Fenn shrugged, his massive shoulders rolling under his shirt. "You would have figured something out. You seem like the surviving type. What makes you say that? You are here, are you not? Still standing, still fighting, that takes strength." He stood and collected their bowls, taking them to a basin near the water barrel. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what happens next." Willa wanted to protest, wanted to insist on helping with the cleaning up, but her body was already making the decision for her. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the bed, sitting down on the edge. The furs were soft beneath her hands, and the mattress was filled with something that gave beneath her weight in a way that promised comfort. "There is a screen in the corner if you want privacy to change," Fenn said, not looking at her as he washed the bowls. "And a chamber pot behind it as well." Willa's cheeks heated, but she was grateful for his practical consideration. She retrieved her bag and went behind the screen, changing out of her traveling dress and into her nightgown. When she emerged, Fenn had settled himself on the floor in front of the fireplace, his back against the stone hearth, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He looked uncomfortable, his long legs stretched out, and his body too big for the space he was trying to occupy. Willa felt a pang of guilt, but she was too exhausted to argue with him again. She climbed into the bed and pulled the fur up over herself, and despite everything, despite the strange place and the strange man and the uncertain future, she fell asleep almost immediately. She woke once in the night, confused about where she was until memory returned. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow across the room. Fenn was still by the hearth, but he had shifted in his sleep, his head tilted back against the stone and his breathing deep and even. Even in sleep he looked powerful, his arms crossed over his broad chest and his features relaxed in a way they had not been while he was awake. Willa studied him in the dim light, this man who had taken in a stranger without question, who had offered shelter and safety when no one else would. Who was Fenn Forrester really? And why did the people of Genoa treat him with the same contempt they had shown her? She would find out tomorrow, she decided. For now, she let herself sink back into sleep, feeling safer than she had in months. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the windows, and the sound of Fenn moving around the cabin. Willa sat up slowly, her body stiff from the long journey and the unfamiliar bed. Fenn glanced over at her from where he stood at the stove. "There is water heating if you want to wash," he said, "and I will have breakfast ready soon." Willa took advantage of the privacy screen again, washing her face and hands with the warm water Fenn had thoughtfully provided in a basin, then dressing in a simple day dress that was starting to strain across her belly. She would need to let out the seams soon, or find fabric to make new dresses. Another worry to add to the growing list. When she emerged, Fenn had plates of eggs and bacon on the table, along with more bread and butter, and a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. "I did not know if you drink coffee," he said, "given your condition." "I do, though I have been trying to limit it." Willa sat down and accepted the cup he poured for her, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "Where did you get fresh eggs?" "I have chickens in a coop out back, and a goat for milk. The bacon I traded for in town last month." He sat down across from her with his own plate. "I am fairly self-sufficient up here, but I do have to go down for supplies every few months. That must be difficult given how they treat you." Fenn's jaw tightened. "I manage. They want my furs and my meat, so they tolerate me long enough to make the trade. Then they make it clear I am not welcome to linger. Why do they treat you that way?" He was quiet for a moment, chewing his food slowly. Then he said, "5 years ago, I killed a man in Genoa. He was beating a Chinese woman in the street and no one was stopping him. I stepped in, things got ugly, and I ended up breaking his neck." Willa's eyes widened, but she did not interrupt. "He was the son of one of the founding families, and I was a nobody who had just drifted into town. They wanted to hang me for murder, but there were enough witnesses who admitted he threw the first punch that they settled for running me out of town instead. I came up here, built this cabin, and I have been here ever since. They do not want me in their town, and I am perfectly happy to oblige them. That is why you help me," Willa said quietly. "You know what it is like to be judged unfairly." "I killed a man," Fenn said bluntly. "That is not unfair, but I did it for the right reasons, and I would do it again." "You, though? You did not do anything wrong except trust the wrong man, and they are treating you like you are the one who committed a crime." Willa felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for understanding." "What are you planning to do?" Fenn asked, changing the subject with the same practical directness he seemed to bring to everything. "You cannot stay pregnant forever, and you will need help when your time comes, I know." Willa pushed eggs around her plate. "I was hoping to find work in Genoa, save up money, maybe find a midwife who would help me when the baby comes. After that, I do not know. Find a place where no one knows my story, I suppose. Start over. You could stay here." Willa's head snapped up. "What?" Fenn met her eyes steadily. "I am just saying you could stay here. The cabin is small, but I could build an addition. There is plenty of game and good water from the creek. You would be safe, and you would not have to deal with the people in town unless you wanted to. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." He leaned back in his chair. His arms crossed over his chest. "Look, I know this is strange. We just met yesterday, and you have no reason to trust me. But the way I see it, you need help, and I have the means to provide it. No expectations, no demands. Just a roof over your head and food in your belly until you figure out what you want to do next." Willa stared at him, searching for any sign of ulterior motives or hidden agendas. But all she saw was honest sincerity in those green eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked again. "Because no one did it for me when I needed it," Fenn said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do. I may be mountain trash to the folks down in Genoa, but my mother raised me better than to turn away someone in need." Willa felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough over the past few months, but the kindness in Fenn's offer, the unexpected generosity of this rough mountain man, was almost more than she could bear. "I will stay," she said. "At least for now, but I want to help. I will not just sit around being useless." A smile tugged at the corner of Fenn's mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "I was hoping you would say that. I can always use help around here, and I am a terrible cook. If you can improve on my stew, I will consider us even." Willa found herself smiling back. "I can definitely do that." And so began the strangest and most unexpected living arrangement Willa had ever experienced. Those first few days were awkward as they figured out how to share the small space, how to navigate around each other, how to establish routines and boundaries. Fenn was true to his word about building an addition to the cabin. He spent his mornings working on it, his shirt often discarded in the heat, his muscles flexing as he swung an axe and hauled logs. Willa tried not to stare, but it was difficult. She had never seen a man built like Fenn before, all raw power and controlled strength. In the afternoons he would hunt or check his traps while Willa worked on the cabin, cleaning and organizing and making the space more livable. She cooked proper meals, baked bread, even made curtains from fabric Fenn had stored away for some unknown purpose. In the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk. Fenn was not much of a talker at first, answering questions with short, direct responses, but gradually, as he grew more comfortable, he began to open up. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 6 children on a hardscrabble farm, about heading west at 18 to find his fortune, only to find mostly hard work and harder luck, about the years he had spent drifting from town to town, working whatever jobs he could find, until that fateful day in Genoa when he had made a choice that changed everything. "Do you regret it?" Willa asked one evening, about a week after her arrival. "Killing that man?" Fenn stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I regret that it came to that. But no, I do not regret stopping him from beating that woman. She did not deserve what he was doing to her, and no one else was going to help her. What happened to her? The woman? She left town not long after. I think she went to San Francisco, where there was a bigger Chinese community. I hope she found somewhere safer than Genoa." He glanced at Willa. "What about you? Do you regret what happened with that man in Sacramento?" "I regret trusting him," Willa said. "I regret believing his lies, but I do not regret this." She placed a hand on her belly, where the baby was becoming more active every day. "Whatever else Richard was, whatever else happened, this child is innocent. And I will love it and protect it with everything I have." "Good," Fenn said, and there was approval in his voice. "That is how it should be." As the days turned into weeks, Willa found herself settling into a rhythm on the mountain. She woke with the sun, helped Fenn with the morning chores, spent her days cooking and cleaning and slowly making the cabin feel like a home. She was not used to physical labor, having grown up in a middle-class family in Sacramento where she had been expected to be decorative rather than useful. But she learned quickly. Fenn was a patient teacher, showing her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to milk the goat, how to recognize edible plants and herbs in the forest. He taught her to shoot his rifle, insisting that she needed to know how to protect herself if he was ever away and trouble came calling. "I am not expecting trouble," he said as he showed her how to load and aim, "but out here, you have to be prepared for anything. Bears, mountain lions, the occasional drunk miner who has lost his way. You need to be able to defend yourself." Willa proved to be a decent shot, much to Fenn's surprise and her own. There was something satisfying about the weight of the rifle in her hands, the kick against her shoulder when she fired, the way the tin cans Fenn set up as targets would fly into the air when she hit them. "You are a natural," Fenn said after she had knocked down 5 cans in a row. "I just imagined them as all the people who judged me in Sacramento," Willa replied, and Fenn laughed, a deep rumbling sound that made something warm bloom in her chest. It was getting harder to ignore the way she felt when she was around Fenn. The way her heart beat faster when he smiled at her, the way her skin tingled when their hands accidentally brushed, the way she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at finally being safe and cared for. But she knew it was more than that. She was falling for him, for this big, rough gentleman who had taken her in without question and asked for nothing in return. But she could not act on these feelings. She was pregnant with another man's child, dependent on Fenn's charity, in no position to complicate their arrangement with messy emotions. So she kept her feelings locked away and tried to focus on preparing for the baby that would arrive in 3 more months. Fenn, for his part, seemed content with their arrangement. He treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, never overstepping the invisible boundaries they had established. He slept on the floor in front of the fire, even though Willa had offered multiple times to switch with him. He was careful not to be too familiar, not to touch her except when helping her over rough ground or steadying her when she lost her balance. But Willa sometimes caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something that might have been longing or might have been simple curiosity. She did not let herself hope it was anything more. The addition to the cabin was finished by mid-August, and Fenn moved his things into the new room, giving Willa privacy and space of her own. The new room had its own fireplace and a large bed Fenn had built himself, and he seemed pleased with his handiwork. "This will be better," he said as he arranged his belongings. You will not have to trip over me in the mornings anymore." Willa should have been happy about the increased privacy, but instead she found herself missing his presence, the sound of his breathing in the night, the sense of security that came from knowing he was close by. One morning in late August, Willa woke feeling different. It took her a moment to realize what it was, and when she did, she could not help but smile. The baby was moving, really moving, strong enough that she could feel it from the outside. She was sitting at the table with her hand on her belly when Fenn came in from the morning chores, his hair damp with sweat and his shirt clinging to his chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern crossing his face when he saw her expression. "I am fine," Willa said. "Better than fine, actually. The baby is moving, here, feel." Before she could think better of it, she reached out and took his hand, placing it on her belly where the baby was kicking. Fenn froze, his hand warm and large against her. They stayed like that for a long moment, and then the baby kicked again, hard enough that there was no mistaking it. Fenn's eyes widened. "That is amazing. It is it not?" Willa looked down at his hand so large it nearly covered her entire belly. She should move away, should take his hand off her, but she could not bring herself to do it. His touch felt too right, too good. When she finally looked up at him, she found him staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and she realized with stunning clarity that she wanted him to. But then Fenn stepped back, pulling his hand away like he had been burned. "I should get cleaned up," he said, his voice rough. "I have to check the traps this afternoon." He disappeared into his room, and Willa sat at the table feeling confused and frustrated, and more than a little disappointed. That evening was awkward, both of them dancing around what had happened that morning. Fenn was quieter than usual, and Willa found herself chattering nervously to fill the silence. Finally, she could not take it anymore. "Fenn, did I do something wrong?" He looked up from the piece of wood he was carving, surprise on his face. "What? No. Why would you think that? You have been strange all day, ever since this morning when I let you feel the baby kick. If I made you uncomfortable, I apologize. I should not have been so forward." Fenn set down his carving and the knife, turning to face her fully. "Willa, you did not make me uncomfortable. Or maybe you did, but not in the way you think. Then what way?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable in a way she had never seen from him before. "This is not easy for me to say, so I am just going to say it straight. I like you, Willa, more than I should, given the circumstances, more than is probably appropriate. And when you took my hand this morning, when I felt that baby kick, all I could think about was how much I wanted that to be my child you were carrying, my family you were building. And that is not fair to you, because you are here because you need help, not because you want to be courted by some mountain hermit." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "Fenn, no, let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "You do not owe me anything, Willa, not gratitude, not affection, and certainly not anything more. I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need to, no strings attached. But I also needed you to know how I feel, because I am not good at hiding things, and I did not want you to think I was being strange for no reason." Willa stood up, her hands trembling. "Can I tell you something now?" Fenn nodded, his expression guarded. "I like you too," Willa said, and watched his eyes widen. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or relief or some other safe emotion, but it is not. I think about you all the time. I watch you when you work, and I admire your strength and your kindness. I feel safe with you in a way I have never felt with anyone else. And yes, this situation is complicated and messy, and I am pregnant with another man's child. But my feelings for you are real." Fenn stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You mean that?" "I do." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and then his hands were cupping her face and he was looking down at her with such tenderness it made her want to cry. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Willa breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid of breaking her. But when Willa made a soft sound of encouragement and wrapped her arms around his neck, Fenn deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair and the other wrapping around her waist. Willa had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such reverence and passion combined, never with such careful attention to her responses. Fenn kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished and protected, and it made her feel things she had never felt before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fenn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, take things slow. You have been through so much, and you do not need me rushing you into anything. I want that too, Willa said, even though her body was arguing that slow was the last thing it wanted. But her mind knew he was right. They had time, and she wanted to build something real with him, something that would last. From that night on, everything changed and nothing changed. They still maintained separate rooms, still went about their daily routines. But now there were stolen kisses in the kitchen and held hands while watching the sunset and conversations that stretched late into the night. Fenn courted her the way men must have courted women a generation ago, with old-fashioned chivalry and genuine respect. He picked wildflowers for her and left them in a jar on the table. He caught fish from the creek and cooked them for her, even though he admitted he hated cleaning fish. He read to her in the evenings from the books on his shelves, his deep voice turning even dry historical texts into something compelling. And he talked to the baby. That was what made Willa fall completely, irrevocably in love with him. Every night before bed, Fenn would place his hand on her belly and talk to the baby, telling it about the world it would be born into, the mountains and forests and streams, the animals and birds and plants. He told stories about his own childhood, about the mischief he had gotten into and the lessons he had learned. You are going to have the best life, Fenn told the baby one night as Willa sat with her head resting against his shoulder. Your mama is the strongest woman I have ever met, and she is going to teach you how to be brave and kind. And I am going to teach you how to survive out here, how to read the forest and respect the land. You are going to grow up free and wild and loved, and that is a pretty good start if you ask me. You talk like you are going to be here, Willa said softly. I am going to be here, Fenn replied. If you will have me. Willa tilted her head back to look at him. What are you saying? Fenn took a deep breath. I am saying that I love you, Willa Brennan. I love you and I want to be a father to this child if you will let me. I know we have not known each other long, and I know this is not how these things usually happen. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face and go to bed every night knowing you are safe and happy. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Willa felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Fenn kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise, and Willa knew that this was what she had been looking for all along. Not the lies and false promises of a man like Richard Morrison, but the honest devotion of a man like Fenn Forrester. They were married a week later by a traveling preacher who passed through Genoa on his circuit. Fenn rode down to town to fetch him, enduring the stares and whispers to arrange for the ceremony. The preacher was an old man named Reverend Stone, who had seen enough of life not to judge, and he agreed to ride up the mountain to perform the wedding. Willa wore her best dress, let out to accommodate her growing belly, and Fenn wore clean clothes with his hair tied back and his beard trimmed. They stood in the clearing in front of the cabin with the mountains rising up behind them and the valley spreading out below, and they pledged themselves to each other before God and Reverend Stone and the wilderness that surrounded them. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Stone said with a smile. You may kiss your bride. Fenn did, pulling Willa close and kissing her with such joy that the old preacher laughed and said, Well now, that is the kind of kiss that promises a happy marriage. That night, Fenn carried Willa over the threshold of the cabin like she weighed nothing, both of them laughing like children. He set her down gently and then just stood there looking at her with such love in his eyes that Willa felt her heart might burst. I am the luckiest man alive, he said. I am pretty lucky too, Willa replied, reaching up to touch his face. How did I get so lucky to find you? We found each other, Fenn corrected, and I am never letting you go. They made love that night for the first time, slowly and carefully. Fenn treating her with such reverence and care that Willa felt like she might dissolve from the tenderness of it. He kissed every inch of her skin, whispering how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, how grateful he was to have found her. And when they finally came together, it was like nothing Willa had ever experienced before. This was not the hasty, guilt-tinged encounters she had shared with Richard, full of secrecy and shame. This was open and honest and full of love. Two people coming together as equals, as partners, as husband and wife. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Fenn's bed, Willa's head on his chest and his arm wrapped around her. The baby kicked against Fenn's side and he laughed softly. I think someone is saying hello, he said, placing his hand on Willa's belly. Or complaining about being squished, Willa said. Well, they better get used to it because I plan to hold you like this every night for the rest of our lives. I can live with that, Willa said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Fenn built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as glass and carving a pattern of stars along the sides. Willa sewed blankets and tiny clothes from fabric Fenn brought back from trips to town, her hands remembering skills her mother had taught her years ago. They talked about names, debating options late into the night. They agreed that if the baby was a girl, they would name her Rose after Fenn's mother. If it was a boy, they could not agree on anything until Willa suggested James, which made Fenn smile. That was my father's name, he said. He died when I was 10, but he was a good man. I would be honored to have a son named after him. As Willa's belly grew larger and the baby more active, Fenn became increasingly protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or walk too far from the cabin. He made her rest in the afternoons and elevated her feet when they swelled. He worried constantly that something might go wrong, that he would not be able to help her when her time came. I should bring a midwife up here, he said one evening in early November. Someone who knows what they are doing. The nearest midwife is in Genoa, Willa pointed out, and I doubt she would come even if you paid her. Then I will find someone else. There has to be someone in one of the other towns who would be willing to help. Fenn, women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We will manage. I just want you to be safe, he said, and there was real fear in his voice. I cannot lose you, Willa. I just found you. Willa took his face in her hands. You are not going to lose me. I am strong, and you are going to be with me. And we are going to get through this together. I promise. Fenn made a trip to Carson City in mid-November and came back with a midwife named Mrs. Patterson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies. She examined Willa thoroughly and declared her healthy and strong. The baby is positioned well and you have good hips for birthing, Mrs. Patterson said. I do not anticipate any problems. When your time comes, send your husband to fetch me and I will come right away. Thank you, Willa said, relieved to have a plan in place. Mrs. Patterson looked between Willa and Fenn, taking in their obvious devotion to each other. You two are lucky to have found each other. Not many men would take on another man's child. It is my child, Fenn said firmly. Biology does not matter. This baby is going to be a Forrester, and I am going to love it as my own. Mrs. Patterson smiled. Then you are going to be a good father. That is what matters. December came with the first heavy snows, blanketing the mountain in white and making travel to Genoa difficult. Fenn had stocked up on supplies in anticipation of winter, but Willa could see him growing more anxious as her due date approached. Every twinge, every change in her breathing, every time she shifted uncomfortably had him on high alert. You need to relax, Willa told him one evening. You are going to drive yourself crazy if you keep worrying like this. I cannot help it, Fenn said. What if something happens and I cannot get to Mrs. Patterson in time? What if there are complications and I do not know what to do? Then we will figure it out together, Willa said. Fenn, I need you to trust that this is going to be all right. I need you to be strong for me because when the time comes, I am going to need you to keep calm and help me through it. Fenn took a deep breath and nodded. You are right. I am sorry. I will do better. But Willa could still see the worry in his eyes, could feel the tension in his body when he held her at night. She wished she could ease his fears, but she knew that only the safe delivery of the baby would do that. The contractions started on a cold December morning, 2 days before Christmas. Willa woke with a strange cramping sensation and knew immediately that it was time. She lay in bed for a while, timing the contractions and waiting to wake Fenn, wanting to be sure before she sent him out in the snow. But when the contractions grew closer together and more intense, she finally reached over and shook his shoulder. Fenn, wake up. It is time. Fenn was on his feet instantly, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and terror. Time? Are you sure? I am sure, Willa said, gripping his hand as another contraction washed over her. Fenn dressed quickly and then helped Willa to the main room, settling her in a chair near the fire. I am going to get Mrs. Patterson. Will you be all right here for a few hours? I will be fine, Willa said, even though she was not entirely sure that was true. Go quickly. Fenn kissed her hard and fast. I love you. I will be back as soon as I can. Then he was gone, riding out into the snow, and Willa was alone with the beginning of what she knew would be a long and difficult day. The contractions grew stronger and closer together as the morning wore on. Willa paced the cabin, leaning against furniture when the pain became too intense. breathing through each wave and trying to remember everything she had heard about childbirth. She had water heating on the stove and towels laid out, and she tried to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. By the time she heard horses outside, the contractions were coming every few minutes, and Willa was sweating despite the cold. Fenn burst through the door, with Mrs. Patterson right behind him, both of them covered in snow. "How far apart are the contractions?" Mrs. Patterson asked, already taking off her coat and rolling up her sleeves. 3 minutes, maybe 4, Willa gasped. "Good, that means we have time, but not much." Mrs. Patterson turned to Fenn. "I need you to bring me hot water and clean towels, and then I need you to help me get your wife into bed." Fenn did as he was told, his hands shaking slightly as he helped Willa to the bedroom. Once she was settled, Mrs. Patterson examined her and nodded. "You are doing well. The baby should be here by evening." Evening felt like a lifetime away. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort, of Mrs. Patterson's calm instructions and Fenn's constant presence at her side. He held her hand and wiped her face with cool cloths and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. "I cannot do this," Willa sobbed at one point, exhausted and overwhelmed. "Yes, you can," Fenn said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, Willa. You survived everything that was thrown at you, and you are going to survive this too. Just a little longer. Our baby is almost here." And finally, as the winter sun was setting and painting the snow outside orange and pink, Willa gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slide free. For a moment there was silence and Willa's heart stopped. But then a thin, angry wail filled the cabin, and Mrs. Patterson laughed. "You have a daughter," she said, placing the squirming, crying baby on Willa's chest. "A beautiful, healthy daughter." Willa looked down at the tiny red face, at the shock of dark hair and the flailing fists, and felt her heart crack wide open with love. "Hello, Rose," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Fenn was staring at the baby with wonder in his eyes, and when he looked up at Willa, there were tears running down his face. "She is perfect. She is," Willa agreed. "Do you want to hold her?" Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby up and wrapped her in a blanket, then placed her in Fenn's arms. He held her like she was made of glass, his massive hands so gentle, his expression full of awe. "Hello, Rose," he said softly. "I am your papa. I am going to protect you and love you for the rest of my life. That is a promise." Rose stopped crying and seemed to look up at him, her dark eyes trying to focus on his face. Fenn laughed through his tears. "She knows me already." "Of course she does," Willa said. "She has been hearing your voice for months." Mrs. Patterson stayed for 2 more days, making sure both Willa and Rose were healthy and teaching Willa how to nurse and care for the baby. By the time she left, Willa felt more confident, though still overwhelmed by the reality of having a newborn. "You are going to do just fine," Mrs. Patterson said as she prepared to leave. "You have a good man and a strong spirit. That baby is lucky to have you." That first winter with Rose was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby cried often, demanding to be fed or changed or simply held, and Willa spent most of her days in a fog of sleeplessness. But Fenn was there for every moment, taking Rose when Willa needed to rest, walking her around the cabin when she would not stop crying, changing diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love something this much," he said one night, holding Rose against his chest while she slept. "It is almost frightening how much I would do for her." "Welcome to parenthood," Willa said with a tired smile. As the months passed and winter gave way to spring, Rose grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby with Willa's blue eyes and dark hair that Fenn swore came from his side of the family. She learned to hold her head up, then to roll over, then to sit up on her own. Every milestone was celebrated like a major achievement, and Fenn took as much pride in her accomplishments as if she had been his from the beginning. By the time Rose was 6 months old, and summer had returned to the mountains, Willa felt like they had settled into a good rhythm. She and Fenn had become a true partnership, splitting the work of running the household and caring for Rose between them. They stole moments of intimacy when they could, reconnecting as husband and wife now that Willa had healed from the birth. One evening in June, almost exactly a year after Willa had first arrived in Genoa, they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Rose slept in her cradle. Fenn had his arm around Willa's shoulders and she was leaning into his warmth, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. "Do you ever miss it?" Fenn asked. "The city, civilization, other people?" Willa thought about it. "Sometimes I miss having other women to talk to or being able to go to a store whenever I need something. But no, I do not miss the city itself. I do not miss the judgment and the gossip and the constant pressure to be something I was not. Here, I can just be myself. I can be your wife and Rose's mother, and that is enough." "It is more than enough," Fenn said. "It is everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Willa said, "I have been thinking. Rose is going to need to interact with other children eventually, learn about the world beyond this mountain. Maybe we could start going down to town occasionally, let her get used to people." Fenn tensed. "I do not know if that is a good idea. You know how they are down there." "I do. But I also know that we cannot keep her isolated forever. And maybe, just maybe, if they see that we are a real family, that we are happy and respectable, they will soften their attitudes. Or maybe they will be just as cruel as always." "Maybe," Willa admitted. "But I do not want to teach our daughter to hide away from the world because some people are small-minded and mean. I want her to hold her head high and know that she has nothing to be ashamed of." Fenn was quiet for a long moment, then he sighed. "You are right. As usual. We will go down next week, make a trip for supplies. If they give us trouble, we leave and do not come back." "Deal," Willa said, and kissed him. The trip to Genoa the following week was every bit as uncomfortable as Willa had expected. People stared as Fenn rode into town with Willa seated behind him and Rose strapped to Willa's chest in a sling Fenn had fashioned from soft leather. Whispers followed them as they dismounted in front of the general store, but Willa kept her head high, just as she had told Rose to do someday, and walked into the store with Fenn at her side. The shopkeeper's wife was still behind the counter, and her expression when she saw them was priceless. "We need supplies," Fenn said, his voice brooking no argument. "I have a list." The woman looked like she wanted to refuse, but the store needed the business and she knew it. She took the list with obvious reluctance and began gathering items. While they waited, other customers came and went, most of them giving Fenn and Willa a wide berth. But one woman, younger than the others, with a kind face, stopped to look at Rose. "What a beautiful baby," she said. "How old is she?" 6 months, Willa replied, grateful for the friendliness. "Her name is Rose." "That is a lovely name. I am Emily Shaw. My husband and I moved here a few months ago from San Francisco." She lowered her voice. "I have heard the gossip about you two, and I just want you to know that not everyone in this town is so quick to judge." "Thank you," Willa said, feeling a warmth in her chest. "That means more than you know." Emily smiled. "Perhaps you could come to tea sometime? I would love the company. And I am sure Rose and my son would get along well. He is 8 months old." "I would like that very much," Willa said. They made arrangements to meet the following week, and by the time Fenn had paid for their supplies and they were heading back up the mountain, Willa felt lighter than she had in months. "See?" she said to Fenn. "Not everyone is terrible. One person—" Fenn pointed out, but he was smiling. "But I suppose that is a start." As it turned out, Emily Shaw was just the beginning. Word spread among the newer residents of Genoa that the mountain man and his wife were actually decent people, and slowly, grudgingly, attitudes began to shift. It helped that Fenn was an excellent trapper and hunter, and that Willa proved to be skilled at herbal remedies and was willing to help anyone who asked, regardless of how they had treated her before. By the time Rose was a year old, Fenn and Willa had carved out a place for themselves in the community. They would never be fully accepted by the old-timers who remembered the man Fenn had killed, or who could not forget Willa's past, but they had friends now, people who came to visit the mountain cabin, and who invited them to social gatherings in town. Rose thrived in this environment, growing into a happy, confident toddler who seemed to have inherited her father's fearlessness and her mother's determination. She learned to walk on the mountain trails, holding Fenn's hand and chattering in her own baby language about everything she saw. "She is going to be a force of nature," Emily said one afternoon while visiting the cabin. Her son, Thomas, was playing with Rose on a blanket spread out in the clearing. "Just like her parents." "I hope so," Willa said. "I want her to grow up knowing that she can do anything, be anything. I want her to never feel limited by what other people think she should be." "You are giving her that," Emily assured her. "Both of you are. She is lucky to have you." That night, after Rose was asleep in her cradle and Emily had headed back to town, Willa and Fenn lay in bed together, talking quietly in the dark. "Did you ever think we would end up here?" Willa asked. "Happy, settled, part of a community." "No," Fenn admitted. "When I rode into town that day and saw you standing there, I thought maybe I could help you for a few weeks, get you back on your feet. I never imagined this." "What do you mean?" "I never imagined falling in love. I never imagined having a family. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone on this mountain, and I was fine with that. But then you came along and changed everything. He pulled her closer, his hand resting on her hip. You gave me a reason to be more than just the mountain man they all despise. You gave me a family and a purpose and a future. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every single day. Willa felt tears prickling at her eyes. You saved me, Fenn. When I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, you took me in. You gave me safety and respect and love. You took on Rose as your own without hesitation. If anyone is grateful, it is me. We saved each other, Fenn said, and kissed her deeply. As the years passed, life on the mountain continued to be good. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who loved exploring the forest with her father and learning to cook and sew with her mother. When she was 3, Willa became pregnant again, and this time there was no fear or uncertainty, only joy. Their son was born on a warm spring morning in 1876, an easy birth compared to Rose's arrival. They named him James, as they had discussed years before, and he was the image of his father with dark green eyes and a shock of brown hair. Rose was fascinated by her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything from feeding to changing to rocking him to sleep. Fenn watched his children with such pride and love that Willa sometimes thought her heart might burst from happiness. "We have done well," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Rose chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while James slept in Fenn's arms. "We have," Fenn agreed. "Who would have thought that the woman nobody wanted in town would end up being the best thing that ever happened to me?" Willa laughed. "Or that the mountain man everyone feared would turn out to be the best husband and father anyone could ask for." "Life is funny that way," Fenn said. "All it takes is one moment, one choice, one person brave enough to take a chance. You took a chance on me when you let me bring you up here. I took a chance on you when I offered. And look what happened. We built something beautiful." "We did," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we are going to keep building it. For as long as we live." When Rose was 5 and James was 2, Fenn surprised Willa by suggesting they build a bigger house. The cabin had served them well, but with 2 growing children they were starting to feel cramped. "I want to build you a real house," he said. "Something with multiple bedrooms and a proper kitchen and windows that let in lots of light. I want you to have a home you can be proud of." "I am proud of our cabin," Willa protested. "It is where we started our life together, and we will always have that." Fenn said, "But we can start a new chapter too." "What do you say?" Willa agreed, and Fenn threw himself into the project with characteristic determination. He hired a few men from town to help with the heavy construction, and by the end of summer, a beautiful house stood next to the old cabin. It had 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen with a proper stove, a living area with big windows that looked out over the valley, and even a small library where Willa could keep her growing collection of books. They moved in just before the first snow, and Willa spent the winter making the house into a home, sewing curtains and cushions, arranging furniture, hanging pictures on the walls. Rose and James each had their own rooms, though they often ended up sleeping together, Rose telling her little brother stories until he fell asleep. The old cabin became Fenn's workshop, where he stored his trapping equipment and worked on various projects. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, Willa would find him sitting in there, just looking around with a small smile on his face. "Remembering?" she asked one such evening. "Always," Fenn said. "This cabin holds all our best memories. This is where we fell in love, where Rose was born, where we became a family. No matter how big or fancy the new house gets, this will always be special to me." "To me too," Willa said, sitting down beside him on the old bed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how much my life has changed. 2 years ago I was alone and desperate, and now I have everything I ever wanted." "Not quite everything," Fenn said mysteriously. "What do you mean?" He pulled something out of his pocket and held it out to her. It was a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. "Open it," he said. Willa did, and gasped. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond set in it. It was not expensive or elaborate, but it was beautiful. "I never gave you a proper wedding ring," Fenn said. "We got married so quickly, and I did not have the money for one then. But I have been saving for 2 years, and I finally have enough." "It is not much, but it is perfect," Willa interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "It is absolutely perfect." Fenn slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet, and Willa thought about how far they had come from that first awkward meeting in Genoa's dusty street. Time continued its steady march forward. Rose grew tall and strong, her father's daughter in every way that mattered. She could track animals through the forest, shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy, and climb trees like a mountain goat. But she also had her mother's gentleness and empathy, always ready to help anyone who needed it. James was quieter than his sister, more contemplative, but just as capable. He loved books and learning, and Willa spent hours teaching him to read and write and figure sums. Fenn taught him the practical skills he would need to survive in the mountains, but he also encouraged his son's intellectual pursuits, proud that James wanted to learn about the world beyond their mountain. When Rose was 8 and James was 5, Willa found herself pregnant again, a surprise that brought equal parts joy and trepidation. She was older now, 32, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous 2 had been. But with Fenn's constant care and Mrs. Patterson's experienced guidance, Willa delivered a healthy baby girl in the autumn of 1881. They named her Sarah after Willa's mother, who had passed away the year before without ever reconciling with her daughter. "I wish she could have known you," Willa told baby Sarah as she nursed. "I wish she could have seen what a wonderful life I built, despite everything." "Her loss," Fenn said firmly. "Any woman who could not see how amazing her daughter is did not deserve to know her grandchildren." Rose and James adored their new baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her and help take care of her. The house rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life, and Willa would not have traded it for anything. As the years rolled on, Genoa continued to grow and change. More families moved in, bringing new ideas and more progressive attitudes. The old-timers who had been so cruel to Willa and Fenn either died off or softened their positions, worn down by time and the undeniable evidence that the Forresters were good people. Fenn eventually became something of a local legend, the mountain man who had defied the town's judgment and built a life of integrity and honor. Young men sought him out for advice on trapping and hunting, and he became known as someone who would help anyone who asked, regardless of their history or reputation. Willa found her own place in the community, becoming the person people turned to for medical advice and herbal remedies. She had a natural talent for healing, and she spent hours studying books on medicine and botany, expanding her knowledge so she could help more people. She never charged for her services, asking only that people pay what they could afford, and her kindness earned her the respect and affection of nearly everyone in the region. Their children thrived in this environment. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman, strong and independent, who could outride and outshoot most of the men in town. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determination, and she made it clear she would not be limited by anyone's expectations of what a woman should or should not do. James proved to be brilliant, devouring every book he could get his hands on and showing a particular aptitude for engineering and mathematics. At 13, he announced his intention to go to university in San Francisco, and while Fenn was reluctant to see his son leave the mountain, he supported the decision. "The world is changing," James said, "and I want to be part of that change, but I will always come back here. This is home." Sarah, the youngest, was showing signs of having inherited the best traits of both her parents and her older siblings. She was fearless like Rose, thoughtful like James, strong like her father, and compassionate like her mother. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the older children grown now but home for the summer, Willa looked around at the faces she loved most in the world and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Fenn asked, noticing her expression. "Just how blessed we are," Willa said. "How far we have come from that day you found me in Genoa." "You mean the day I saw you standing there and knew my life was about to change forever," Fenn said with a smile. "You did not know that," Rose laughed. "Papa, you barely spoke to each other that first day." "Maybe not out loud," Fenn said, "but something in me recognized something in your mother. I just knew I could not let her face that town alone." "Good thing you did not," James said, "or none of us would be here." "Best decision I ever made," Fenn said, reaching across the table to take Willa's hand. "Besides, someone had to show that town what fools they were for rejecting her." "They learned their lesson eventually," Willa said. "We all did. We learned that family is not just about blood, but about who you choose to love and stand by. We learned that home is not a place, but the people you build a life with. And we learned that sometimes the people nobody wants turn out to be exactly the people everyone needs." "That's beautiful, Mama," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Your mother is a wise woman," Fenn said, "which is why I fell in love with her in the first place." As the evening wore on, and the children eventually drifted off to bed, Fenn and Willa sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. They had done this countless times over the years, but it never got old. This was their time, their moment of peace and connection at the end of each day. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Willa asked. "When you brought me up here?" "I said a lot of things," Fenn replied. "You said you were offering me shelter and safety, nothing more. You said no expectations, no demands." Fenn laughed softly. "I was a fool. How could I have ever thought I would not fall in love with you? You gave me everything," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me respect when everyone else saw me as trash. You gave me love when I thought I would never deserve it again. You gave me a family and a future and a reason to keep going. You saved my life, Fenn Forrester. And you saved mine," Fenn said, pulling her close. "I was just existing before you came along, surviving but not really living. You showed me what it meant to have something worth fighting for, worth building for. You gave me purpose and meaning and more love than I ever dreamed possible. So if anyone did the saving, we saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms in the cool mountain breeze. Finally, Willa said, "I wonder what would have happened if you had not been in town that day, if you had not offered to bring me up here." "Do not torture yourself with what-ifs," Fenn said. "We found each other, and that is all that matters." "You are right," Willa agreed. "Besides, I think we were meant to find each other, two outcasts who did not fit in anywhere else, finding a place together where we could just be ourselves. Nobody wanted that woman in this town," Fenn quoted with a wry smile. "Remember them saying that? How could I forget?" And I thought, good. She is coming to my mountain, and now look at us. 15 years later, 3 children, a life we built from nothing. We showed them all, did we not? "We did," Willa said. "We really did." As they sat there under the vast canopy of stars, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the scared, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Genoa, pregnant and alone and certain her life was over. She thought about the moment she had first seen Fenn, this massive, intimidating man who had turned out to have the gentlest heart she had ever known. She thought about all the moments in between. The first tentative conversations, the gradual building of trust, the moment they had both admitted their feelings and taken the leap into love. The wedding in the clearing, the birth of Rose, the years of building their life together. The challenges they had faced and overcome, the joys they had shared, the family they had created. It had not been an easy path. There had been hard winters when supplies ran low, illnesses that scared them, injuries that required long recoveries. There had been times when the town's judgment still stung, when Willa wondered if she had made the right choice in staying here instead of moving somewhere no one knew her story. But through it all, Fenn had been her rock, her partner, her truest love. He had never wavered in his devotion to her, never made her feel like she owed him anything, never held her past against her. He had loved her completely and unconditionally, and he had loved Rose as if she were his own blood from the very first moment. And in return, Willa had given him everything she had, her trust, her love, her loyalty, her body and heart and soul. She had worked beside him to build their life, had stood by him when others would have run, had loved him with a fierceness that surprised even her. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting, a family, yes, but more than that. A partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a home filled with laughter and love. A legacy they could be proud of. Rose was already making her own way in the world, having recently announced her engagement to a young doctor who had moved to Genoa the year before. Willa liked him well enough, though no man would ever be quite good enough for her fierce, wonderful daughter. But he treated Rose as an equal and admired her strength rather than trying to diminish it, and that was what mattered. James would be leaving for university in the fall, pursuing his dreams of becoming an engineer. Willa would miss him terribly, but she was proud of his ambition and determination. He would do great things, she knew it. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, still had years ahead of her at home. Years when Willa and Fenn could watch her grow and guide her and love her through all the ups and downs of childhood and adolescence. But even after the children were grown and gone, even when it was just Willa and Fenn again in their house on the mountain, Willa knew they would be happy. Because they had each other, and that had always been enough. "What are you thinking about now?" Fenn asked, interrupting her reverie. "Just about how much I love you," Willa said honestly. "How grateful I am for every single day we have had together. How excited I am for all the days still to come." "Me too," Fenn said, kissing the top of her head. "Every single day with you is a gift, Willa Forrester. Every single one." They stayed on the porch until the air grew too cold to be comfortable, then went inside to the warmth of their home. As they got ready for bed, moving through the familiar routines they had established over years of marriage, Willa felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was her life. This house on the mountain, this man who loved her, these children they had raised together. This community that had once rejected them but had learned to respect and value them. This future stretching out ahead of them, full of possibilities and promise. She climbed into bed beside Fenn, curling into his warmth as he wrapped his arms around her. This was where she belonged, where she had always belonged even when she had not known it yet. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Fenn replied, his voice already heavy with sleep. "Forever and always, my Willa." As Willa drifted off to sleep, safe and warm and loved, she thought once more about that terrified woman on the stagecoach, about the hostile faces in Genoa, about the moment Fenn had stepped forward and changed everything. They had been right to judge her, those people in town, not because she was a fallen woman or a homewrecker or any of the other ugly things they had called her, but because they had seen her as weak, as broken, as someone to be pitied or scorned. They had been wrong about that. Willa Brennan Forrester was the strongest person she knew, and she had proved it every single day since arriving on this mountain. She had survived loss and rejection and hardship. She had built a life from nothing. She had loved and been loved in return. She had raised 3 incredible children and created a home that was a haven for anyone who needed it. And she had done it all with Fenn by her side, this mountain man who had seen her worth when no one else could. This man who had looked at her that first day and decided, without hesitation, that she deserved better than what she was getting. This man who had spent the last 15 years proving, over and over again, that love was not about grand gestures or pretty words, but about showing up every single day and choosing each other, no matter what. Nobody had wanted that woman in town, but Fenn had wanted her, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to pass on the mountain, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Rose married her doctor and settled in Genoa, giving birth to Willa and Fenn's first grandchild when she was 22. A beautiful baby boy they named Fenn after his grandfather, which made the big mountain man cry tears of joy. James graduated from university with honors and got a job with a major engineering firm in San Francisco, but he came home every summer without fail, bringing stories of the big city and the rapid changes happening in the world. He eventually married a schoolteacher he met through work, a smart, kind woman who understood his love for his mountain home, even though she was a city girl through and through. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman who combined her sister's adventurous spirit with her brother's intellectual curiosity. She decided she wanted to be a teacher, and she opened a small school in Genoa where she taught children of all backgrounds and economic situations. She fell in love with a carpenter who had come west from Boston, and their wedding was the social event of the season, bringing together everyone from the roughest trappers to the wealthiest merchants. Through it all, Willa and Fenn remained constants on their mountain, the foundation that their children could always return to. The house that had once seemed so large with just the two of them now filled regularly with children and grandchildren, and Willa loved nothing more than sitting on her porch with a grandchild on her lap while Fenn taught the older ones how to fish or track or shoot. They grew older together, gray threading through Fenn's dark hair and lines forming around Willa's eyes. But they aged well, staying active and healthy thanks to the physical demands of mountain life and the happiness that seemed to radiate from their very souls. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought half of Genoa up the mountain. People who had once spit on the ground when Willa walked by now toasted her health and happiness. Men who had called Fenn mountain trash now shook his hand and thanked him for his help over the years. It was a stunning reversal, and as Willa stood watching the celebration, Emily Shaw came up beside her. "You have come a long way," Emily said with a smile. She was gray-haired now too, her own children grown, but still the kind friend she had been from the beginning. "We all have," Willa replied. "The town has changed so much because you changed it," Emily said. "You and Fenn showed everyone what real strength looks like, what real love looks like. You did not let them break you, and eventually they had to acknowledge that they had been wrong. You won, Willa. You won completely." Willa looked across the crowd to where Fenn stood, surrounded by their grandchildren, his laughter booming out over the noise of the party. He caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had melted her heart 20 years ago. and she felt her chest tighten with love. "We both won," she said, "because we found each other." As the sun began to set and the party wound down, people headed back to town, leaving the family alone on the mountain. The children and grandchildren eventually settled down for the night, filling every bed and couch and available space in the house. Willa and Fenn ended up on their porch as they so often did, watching the last light fade from the sky. 20 years, Fenn said wonderingly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Willa replied. "Some days I feel like that scared woman on the stagecoach was a completely different person. Other days I remember exactly how that felt, and I am so grateful for how far we have come." "Do you have any regrets?" Fenn asked. Willa thought about it carefully. "I regret the pain that brought me here. I regret that Rose will never know her biological father, though I think she got a much better one in you. I regret the years I lost with my mother before she died. But the life we built together? The family we created? How could I possibly regret any of that?" "Good answer," Fenn said with a grin. "Because I do not regret a single moment. Even the hard times, even the times when money was tight or the winter was brutal or the town was particularly cruel. Every single moment led us to here, to this life, and I would not change a thing. Not even the part where you had to sleep on the floor for months," Willa teased. "Especially not that part," Fenn laughed. "It built character and anticipation." They laughed together, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely, who had been through everything together and come out stronger for it. As they headed inside and up to their bedroom, stepping carefully over sleeping grandchildren scattered throughout the house, Willa reflected on how perfect her life had become. Not perfect in the sense that nothing ever went wrong or that they never faced challenges, but perfect in the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. She had been broken when she arrived in Genoa, shattered by betrayal and rejection and loss. But Fenn had helped her put the pieces back together, and in doing so, they had created something even more beautiful than what had been there before. They were in their 50s now, with grown children and multiple grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories behind them. But they were not done yet. There were still mornings to wake up together, still sunsets to watch from their porch, still quiet moments of connection and loud moments of family chaos. There were still years ahead of them, years to continue building their legacy, to watch their grandchildren grow, to maybe even see great-grandchildren someday. Years to continue showing the world that love could triumph over judgment, that strength came in many forms, that family was what you made it. As Willa settled into bed beside Fenn that night, his arm coming around her waist in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing, she felt complete, whole, happy in a way she had never imagined possible back in her darkest days. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Fenn asked sleepily. "For seeing me when no one else would, for giving me a chance when everyone else had given up on me, for loving me and Rose and building this incredible life with me, for being exactly who you are." Fenn was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about love. Thank you for teaching me what family really means. Thank you for 20 years of happiness I never knew I was missing. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my best friend, my everything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love and their life together. And in the morning, they would wake up and do it all over again. Because that was what they did, day after day, year after year, building their life together one moment at a time. The story of Willa and Fenn Forrester became something of a legend in Genoa and the surrounding areas. People told it as an example of true love triumphing over adversity, of two outcasts finding each other and creating something beautiful from nothing. Young couples would point to them as proof that real, lasting love existed, that it was possible to overcome any obstacle if you had the right person by your side. As they entered their 60s and then their 70s, Fenn and Willa slowed down somewhat, but they never stopped living fully. They still took walks in the forest, though shorter ones now. They still sat on their porch every evening, though with blankets against the chill. They still laughed and loved, and lived with the same passion they had brought to their early days together. Their children were successful and happy, their grandchildren thriving, and they even lived to see the birth of several great-grandchildren, tiny bundles of joy that reminded them of Rose as a newborn, of the moment their family had truly begun. On a warm summer evening when Willa was 75 and Fenn was 78, they sat on their porch as the sun set over the valley. Their bodies were old now, worn by time and hard living, but their spirits were as strong as ever. "Do you remember that first night?" Willa asked, not needing to clarify which night she meant. "Every detail," Fenn replied. "The way you looked so scared but so determined, the way you held your head high even though everyone was staring, the moment I decided I could not let you face it alone. The moment you saved my life, the moment we saved each other," Fenn corrected, as he always did. Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling his steady strength even after all these years. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every single moment, exactly the same way." "Me too," Fenn agreed, "though maybe with a better mattress for those months on the floor." Willa laughed, the sound carrying across the clearing and into the forest beyond. Inside the house, several of their grandchildren were staying for the summer, and she could hear their voices and laughter through the open windows, the sound of family, of love, of ecstasy. "We did good, did we not?" she asked. "We did better than good," Fenn said, kissing the top of her head. "We did extraordinary." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa closed her eyes and let herself feel everything. The love that had sustained them through 5 decades of marriage, the pride in the family they had raised, the satisfaction of a life well lived, full of purpose and meaning, the joy of knowing that they had faced the world together and won. "Nobody wanted that woman in this town," she murmured, repeating those words that had haunted her so long ago. "Good," Fenn replied with the same response he had given 53 years earlier, his voice warm with love and satisfaction. "She came to my mountain instead, and I got to spend the rest of my life loving her." Willa opened her eyes and looked up at her husband, this man who had given her everything when she had nothing, who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable, who had stood by her through every storm and celebrated every triumph. "I love you, Fenn Forrester," she said, "more than words could ever express." "And I love you, Willa Forrester," he replied, "forever and always until my last breath and beyond." They sat there under the stars, holding each other close, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had created a love story for the ages. A story of courage and redemption, of second chances and hard-won happiness, of a mountain man and the woman nobody wanted who became the woman everyone admired, a story that had started with rejection and desperation, but had ended with love and triumph and a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. It was a good ending to a beautiful story. The very best kind of ending, where love won and family thrived, and two people who had started with nothing ended up with everything that mattered. And as the night deepened and the mountain settled into peaceful silence around them, Willa and Fenn remained on their porch, content in their love and their life, grateful for every moment they had been given, and knowing that they had lived their story exactly as it was meant to be lived, together, fearlessly, and with a love that had changed not just their own lives, but the entire community around them. Nobody had wanted that woman in town, but Fenn had wanted her on his mountain, and that simple choice, that moment of compassion and courage, had created ripples that spread far beyond what either of them could have imagined. They had shown the world that love was stronger than judgment, that family was more than blood, and that sometimes the people nobody wanted turned out to be exactly the people everyone needed. It was a perfect ending to a perfect love story, and as Willa and Fenn finally stood to head inside for the night, their hands clasped together as they had been for over 50 years, they both knew that this was what happiness looked like. A life built on love, strengthened by adversity, and filled with the kind of joy that only comes from choosing each other every single day, no matter what the world threw at them.